Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining Christina and I for this artist talk. I'm going to share my screen with you all. So hi, Christina.
Hello.
I realized yesterday when we were talking about some of the questions that I have worked with you a couple of times now.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a kind of ongoing relationship, which is
Yes.
great. From the very beginning to now, and it's so wonderful to continue to see your development as an artist. So I kind of wanted to begin with by asking you kind of a basic question for those who are unfamiliar with your practice. About some of the ideas and kind of issues, ongoing issues that most inspire you and that you continue to want to explore.
Okay. Thank you for having me. And
Mm-hmm.
well, I think most of my work is kind of preoccupied with this idea of memory and cultural heritage. I explore identity, and I also explore my Jamaican heritage quite a bit. And it kind of started from the early days of my undergrad, and it's just kind of preoccupied again my practice up until now, and even going into my master's program for my thesis.
Mm-hmm. So you're always returning to these themes, as you said, of memory, identity, belonging, but usually from a very personal and biographical perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think for me, and I should probably kind of backtrack a bit. I found that during my undergrad, I was kind of concerned for a lack of representation I saw of myself and people from the African diaspora, particularly within the West Indian culture. And I really felt this need to kind of create work that I could relate to, that I thought other people could relate to.
Mm.
And so that's why I feel like it's so personal to me too, to create work that I don't always get a chance. I haven't had the chance to always see. I mean, things are changing now, but I think when you look at the Black body and how typically the African diaspora community has been portrayed in early art history and even to the advent of photography, it's always been kind of from this perspective of an anthropological study or a scientific study. And there wasn't enough narratives that we were sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for me to create work that shares those narratives and finding commonality, even despite our difference, and which kind of led me to the Irie series that kind of birthed into other work.
Mm-hmm. Oops. Oh, good. Yeah, I think your point about, in terms of representation and in terms of especially thinking about different narratives and different stories. And your dad and his birthplace of Jamaica really features prominently in the work you do. And here's a wonderful photograph of your dad and your grandmother, his mother, taken in Jamaica as a child. But as you said, your work, like thinking about everything Irie as, again, this kind of interest in journey, in ideas of memory, really kind of propelled you to do this work. And I know we are going to get to Morant Bay, but I really wanted to begin with this body of work. Because it really does trace your own journey as an artist and these ideas that you're always kind of mining. Can you kind of talk about this series a little bit?
Yeah, so I created everything Irie during my thesis year at OCAD-U, and I was really, and I guess I should start this. I was I noticed what I love so much about when I speak to my father and my relatives is their experiences of Jamaica and even their
Mhm.
earlier experience of migrating here to Canada and just and how they speak about their experiences. They'll flow in and out of patois sometimes and I wanted to create a body of work that kind of demonstrated them as a whole collective and migrating here. And so this was a very lengthy process. This was all done
Mhm.
in the color darkroom. So the process itself is just as significant as the whole entirety of the work,
Mhm.
because I was really touching on how things are kind of handmade in Jamaica with the posters, the reggae posters. I was drawing upon signifiers of, you know, the colors of the Pan African colors of red, yellow, and green, and then black because it's linked to the Jamaican flag. And so I interviewed a number of them, and I just asked them various questions about, what was it like coming here? What do you remember most back home? And just, I wanted to have a whole collection of stories in which the viewer could read their experiences in patois and kind of read it back. And it was interesting because this work has kind of traveled the world globally. And when it went to Prague, in the Czech Republic, I was really worried how the language would get translated into Czech. But they said the universal kind of opinion was that they could still relate to the aspect of having to leave home and moving somewhere else and adapt. So while the language is unique to Jamaica, it the overall theme of the work is universal.
Mhm. Yeah, because it is tapping into this idea of migration,
Hmm.
right? Um, and your dad, again, he's featured very prominently here in the poster in the first image. Your dad is from Morant Bay, a kind of a site of the infamous Morant Bay Rebellion in 1865. So the area itself has a storied history. The kind of interest in the national hero, Paul Bogo, as a result of that. However, recently, the area has been viewed as a kind of forgotten parish. Or St. Thomas, that is. Did you set about with this series to kind of challenge that notion?
I think I had a twofold idea for the project. I think for me, I wanted to capture a sense of nostalgia, and kind of thinking about my father's experiences there and places he said he went. So that was important for me to kind of capture that and document those places, but also document the people. But I had originally gone with the idea of photographing kind of these abandoned structures that we see. A lot of these structures kind of, I guess they were starting to build them and either residents ran out of money to finish completion of these houses, or some people they had passed away and they had no one to will down these properties to. So that was kind of my original intent, but it turned into something so much different and birthed this project of kind of more uh, capturing the community and
Mm-hmm.
the essence of the community and what was important and how we connect to each other.
Mm-hmm. But so before we get there, and this is a work in progress, again, using the area, again, talking about your dad's experience there. Just before we get to the current exhibition, why did you start even this project? Because here you have, it's less colorful, but you are including black and white. You've got the text, you've got the patois, you've got the language. So all of these elements that you're continually playing with. Can you talk a little bit about this project?
Yeah, so this is kind of work I'm kind of working with and playing with right now while I'm doing my master's. And I think for me, it's interesting about my father is and being biracial. I have my mother who's had her image documented from the time she was born up until now. Whereas my father, there's an absence of years that were documented just because of the access to photography
Mm.
and photographic materials. And so I really don't see, with the exception of that one image and two others, I don't really see any photos of my father prior to like 1969. And so then there starts being a visual record of him. So for me, I wanted to kind of show these images, with him going back home, and the people that he connected with in from back home. And Dolphus is someone who he's known for quite some time, and hearing him speak about him and their connection and his connection to his mother. So that's something that I really wanted to explore further. And I think, again, it's a work in progress, so I haven't always worked out everything, but it's something that I'm kind of looking into. And what's unique, because I'm going to my school is in the States, Savannah, Georgia. There's not a huge Jamaican awareness there of Jamaican culture. I think when they're used to seeing, a Black figure, they associate it with being African American and what that means. And so for me, I'm kind of also wanting to show a new way of presenting the Black body, if you will.
So it's interesting that this project is almost like a collage. The photograph, the image of the island, the text. So you're still kind of working in a conceptual way. And then the Morant Bay series or project, which of course forms the exhibition that we're talking about. You've gone completely back to a documentary tradition, strict black and white. Why was that important for you, to really not kind of mess with the image, to just really shoot it quite straight in black and white? When folks get a chance to come into the gallery to engage with this work, I think they'll be able to see how rich the tones are. Why was it important for you to kind of just come right back to this tradition?
Well, if you look at the history of documentary photography, it's always kind of been presented in black and white. And I think that's important, that we start seeing representation of our own culture in black and white within that tradition of documentary photography. I also think that when you think about Jamaica, we're inundated with images of tourism. You see the classic things of the food, the music, kind of very tourist related photos like Dunn's River Falls, and just different things that you associate with the island. But when you take out the color, I think you really are left with the presence of the community, and left with the presence of having to sit and look at the whole image in its entirety. And so that's how I was thinking when I shot the piece, of just removing all the color, and just so that you could kind of sit within each image and really take it in. I think sometimes Jamaica gets distracted with the color, if that makes sense. So this is kind of why I shot it in this way. And I wanted it to sit on the same level as, our Dorothea Lange photos and prior documentary photos, like your classic Cindy Sherman's and all, and Alfred Stieglitz, all those. So to me, it needed to be in black and white. It needed to carry weight.
No, I love that idea of kind of stripping the kind of, Jamaica or the Caribbean as a whole is this kind of exoticized tropical site, and just engaging with the place it is, the place itself, without literally being colored by those kinds of stereotypes. I think you really strip that out. And also, I was thinking about it this morning, and thinking about the Morant Bay, rebellion and that history. The way you shot these photographs, there's something very historic. It feels like the history meets the contemporary in a way.
Right.
So you haven't erased that history, but you've brought this kind of very contemporary element because you're shooting it today, 2018. So I love that kind of the mixture that you've achieved by shooting it in this way. So this is South Street. Can you tell me just very quickly about why you wanted to document this or position this area or this street?
Well, this corner, I kind of am fascinated by kind of graphics of street signs and just lines. And so compositionally, I felt like it kind of divided the image, with the pole in the middle and South Street. And it's just kind of thinking about this intersection of the community. And so it was kind of just, it was really overcast this day, and it just felt like a really, like I wanted to contain this image and kind of contain this spot. And also this house it shows my original set where it was declined. It's kind of falling apart, but they're still managing to have life in it and build around it.
So this image you've described as your favorite work in the series. I must say that it's one of my favorites as well. It's an extraordinary photograph. It's gotten a lot of attention recently because a selection of these works were exhibited for the Capture exhibition in Vancouver on large billboards. And it's just a kind of compelling, amazing photograph with the stillness of this lone figure and the roaring falls, reggae falls behind it. I'm just fascinated with how you set this up, because the stillness and the kind of energy of the waterfall is so poetic and so beautiful. Can you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, so this photo, we were at Reggae Falls, and this young man was teaching his son kind of to swim, and he kind of stood right in the middle of the falls, and it was just kind of this picture perfect moment. I think photographers sometimes don't sit in their shots. They kind of do this spray and pray thing where they're just clicking and firing off images, but they don't sit and wait for that moment. And this is one of those moments, and it just felt right. I kind of slowed down my shutter speed so you could see the capturing of the falls at the back, and I held still, like really still, so that I wasn't shaking. But and I think it kind of just shows a presence there. And I think we need to have more images that show our presence, and I think this is a good example of one. It's probably one of my favorite images that I've ever shot. And now I feel like I have to live up to the expectations of it. But
you can, yeah. Christina, you can. Grandfather's Yard. This is a photograph in the gallery that we more or less begin the show with. And it has a lot of meaning for you. Can you talk about it a little bit?
So this is my grandfather's house. He passed away about 15 years ago. And so the property there was dispute over the property for a little bit. And so it's kind of just been sitting there. And it shows kind of the decline of the actual house. At the front of the house, there used to be like a water fountain, and there used to be lined with crocuses and poinsettias and roses. And the house was a beautiful, like green kind of color. And it kind of just made me think about how different it looks now. And it's still sitting there. And there was no occupants really, but I wanted to go back and take photos of it and kind of show what it looks like now. And it kind of also, with my memory of it, is different. Like, it's different when you revisit something as an adult and how it changes when you were a child, because it felt like it was bigger as a child, but when I'm there now, it feels a bit smaller.
I was just going to say that I think anytime those of us who are from the Caribbean and we're going back and forth, and our grandparents' house are still there, and you think, oh my goodness, when I was 4, this seemed like a mansion. It seemed like this giant house. And then you go back and you think, ooh, it's quite small, actually. There's a presence you have as a child, and as you said, your memories are really shaped and then they keep kind of changing every time you go back and forth. And that's why I think the title for this show, Absence and Presence, you know, and you've brought up that notion of presence a lot as you keep talking, that it is about a presence. It's about always establishing that presence. And you as a photographer, continually kind of negotiating that presence, you know, as, you know, memories change and the time moves on and the place changes. And again, your use of black and white, the fact that, you know, as you said, you've described all of the colors, but in black and white, it just seems so muted. You know, a kind of, it was this kind of glamorous place, which then time changed in a way.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because my father's childhood home was destroyed during Hurricane Gilbert. So I don't have really, and when he describes that house, it was a great house. When he describes that house, I wish there was photos of the whole place. And when I got to finally see it, I saw it after it had been destroyed. So it didn't have the same weight. So to me, this is kind of the closest thing to my father's home, but it's not his childhood home, if that makes sense.
Right. You know, so you're preserving that memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about this photograph at the opening, and I wanted to come back to it because I think it really does, again, capture your, you know, ability as a photographer, the kind of double exposure effect that you've created, his engagement with you and yours with him. I just think it's a wonderful image. Can you tell people how you managed to get him to slow down a little bit and take the photograph? Because he looks like he's in flight.
He is. For those who hadn't attended the opening, just to bring you up to speed. So every day I would go for a walk, and this little boy he was kind of always en route whenever I was outside taking photos. And my last day, he kind of stopped very quickly to kind of just wave and say a quick hello. And because he was walking so fast, I had already slowed down my shutter speed to check to get his movements, and then I kind of just thought, I'm going to take it to show action and kind of this relationship of him pausing to acknowledge me, but then he's off again. And I really like how the negative space works with the ground and the texture, and I think about how it works within the frame of documentary photography too as well. And I think now, as I've noticed a current trend where photographers, I notice newer photographers, they might be scared to use tricks like double exposures. And so I think for me, it's also kind of going back to these techniques that you learn about when you first are learning your craft of photography, and using them still, and not ignoring them, and not being set of always having to have your photo in picture perfect focus. You know?
Well, I love that about your work, Christina, because you actually are not afraid to experiment. And I think all of your work and your practice is about a constant experimentation and pushing the medium, and acknowledging the medium's history, right? And so I really, and I love the fact that you really take your time. You know, you're not producing, you know, every 6 months it's a new series or a new, you know, you do a lot of research, you embed yourself in both the history, and in this case, it's the history of a personal history of a place and the history of the photography. And then you're, you know, constantly moving between both of those things, right? And experimenting. So I must say I really enjoy that about your work.
Thank
and
you.
It's obviously is evoked here in this photograph. So Shoemaker, and I'm going to toggle between Shoemaker and Carl, because you also have a really great sense of how you work a space and how you capture subjects in terms of, you know, the kind of close and intimate proximity in order to take the shot. But it never feels invasive. I never feel as if, you know, oh, I know, you know, where Christina is actually standing, or he seems to be aware of her presence in some weird way. How do you reconcile this? Because I think you, in both of these photographs, Shoemaker and, Carl, you know, and in Carl, you know, it's this, he's got such a presence, and you are definitely quite close to him, but he looks extremely comfortable. You know, there's no sense that, so there feels as if there's been some kind of negotiation. So can you talk about both of these works in terms of your approach?
So for me, I always feel like it's important when you're documenting, I think, other people, that you respect them, you have a level of rapport with them, you build trust, because you're not going to get, first of all, you're not going to get a very good photo. But I also think, you know, you have to learn how to be non-invasive. You have to wait for those shots. And I think for me, I never take photos of anyone without asking them. I think we need to be aware of how in the past there's been cultural appropriation, how you see these images that seem evasive, they seem very exploitive, and it creates a different narrative. Whereas this, you know, you have to just kind of build a rapport. And with the shoemaker, he was actually fixing my mother's shoe. Her shoe broke, and we brought it into town, and he was willing to fix it. And I was just watching him, and I asked him about, how his day was, what he did. His name is Nathan, and he was okay with me taking a photo of him doing it. But I never waited to take the shot. I just kind of stayed in the moment, and that's how I kind of work when I do my photographs. I kind of stay in the moment. I don't like them to look too posed or unnatural. I kind of wait for that moment, and then to me it feels more authentic. There's yeah.
Well, and you're also, for me, you're capturing this dying craft, shoemaking, right? You know, it's like in small towns, you have a shoemaker, and these are the tools that they use. And, you know, 5 years from now, you may go back and Nathan may not be there, you know, plying his trade, you know, so that in a way you're actually documenting a moment in time as well, and a skill set that unfortunately is going away, especially here in the West. So I'm hard pressed to find shoemakers now. So, and Carl.
So Carl is a family friend of my aunt. So I met him through my aunt. He's actually a Maroon. He comes from a long line of Maroons.
Wow.
And so he just kind of he would pop in and out of the day. Sometimes he would show up at my aunt's workplace. Sometimes he shows up at the house. He's just a really lovely man, and he was okay. I asked him, I said, Carl, can I take your photo? And he was like, yeah, Mom. Like, he was just really receptive of it. And I feel like this captures his personality. He's a really nice man, and he's got a kind spirit and a kind heart. So
yeah, and again, in person, this photograph is spectacular. I mean, you can see Carl's pores. It's fabulous. And was this done outside?
No,
Natural light?
So it's using natural light, but I used my 50 millimeter lens because I wanted to have a bokeh effect on the back.
Right.
And so I could really bring him to the foreground and just kind of leave the background in blur. And I think, you know, when, again, knowing photography,
gorgeous photograph.
Yeah, changing your lenses, I think, help, you know, with your craft. You get different photos by even just the lens that you use.
And this is in a similar way that you captured the Portland rappers. And I wanted to kind of build on what you were just saying. You know, St. Thomas is a small community. tight-knit, I imagine. Do your subjects engage in this process with you, as we saw with Carl and the shoemaker? Is there any suspicions of your motivations? So how did you approach the Portland rappers to get this incredible photograph? Because
Well,
they are definitely performing.
Yeah. So that what I found, because they're in this element of wanting to do music, they are natural performers. So they naturally wanted to kind of pose themselves. And they were kind of on the beach beating a juice, as I call it, and we were just talking, and one of the gentlemen he had lived in Brampton for a bit, and he said it was just too cold. He had to come back home. But I feel like because I had talked to them and we had these conversations, it was very easy to get a photograph. And at first I wasn't even going to take their photo. They saw me with my camera and they're like, "You don't want to take my picture?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." But I think this was kind of, and then me trying to take photos of them in their presence, and so they're posing themselves, but I'm still aware compositionally of how it should look, and they were very nice gentlemen. Yeah.
No, it's a great photograph. Yeah, and we've spoken about this. So Next to Falls, this is my second favorite photograph. I mean, I like all of the photographs, but Bathers is kind of an extraordinary photograph because every time I see it, I see something else, which I love. So it's this, well, you'll explain exactly what we're seeing, but it's dense and frenetic, yet there's a stillness to it, yet there's movement. You've got this, the double exposure going on. There's so much packed into this photograph. The kind of tropical backdrop, all done in black and white, incredibly rich tones, tonal qualities. There's so much to say about this photograph. Can you tell us, first of all, what we are, for viewers who don't know what's happening, what are we looking at?
So this is actually outside of Morant Bay, but still within the Portland and St. Thomas community. So in Bath Fountain is kind of like this natural hot springs. It's kind of, if you go down to the riverbed, which you see there at the front, one side is really, really hot water. And the part where there are people lying down on the rocks, it's very cold and the waters do not touch. So a lot of the locals kind of go down there just to get for healing properties of the waters, and they go to get a Rasta man massage, as these gentlemen call it. And so they kind of dunk the hot water on you first, and they do this kind of cyclical pattern of hot water to cold water while putting pimento oil on you for your ailments. And they actually, I didn't say this last time, but I had gone there, but I also kind of was having, I wasn't feeling too good, I was kind of having digestive issues, and they knew right away that I had digestive issues just by touching me with the rocks. And as soon as they put the hot rocks on me that they had soaked in the hot water, I immediately felt better. But if you look at the photograph, there are people lying on the rocks, which they're performing.
Right here.
Yep. And and at the lower side of the
right
stream.
Here.
Yep.
Yes.
And then, so they're pouring, and they're also getting at that ledge part, they're grabbing the water with jugs, the hot water. That's why you see that jug on the kind of the left side of the photo.
Right here.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they pour that. So everybody's there. And so the men there they charge to do this Rastaman massage, as they call it. And so for me, when I was taking the photo, I was thinking about their movements and how frenzied they were. And everything was just moving so fast. I kind of wanted to slow that down through slowing my shutter speed down, but I also wanted to show movement at the same time. And it's kind of this process of figures moving in and out of the frame. There's frenziness, but there's also a sense of calm, and I wanted to show the foliage around it. I probably could have spent a whole day They're
Mm-hmm.
just photographing. But I also didn't want it to be invasive while people were having this done to them, because you're in your bathing suit, and you want to kind of just be in the moment. There's something very peaceful too about being in that space. You have these trees kind of coming over you. You can hear the birds, you can hear the wind. Your senses feel heightened when you're laying on the rocks. And so for me, I don't know if I even did the actual experience justice with photographing this, but
Well, I
I
mean,
tried.
no, you certainly, I think, succeeded. I'm fascinated with this young man who just kind of stops and stares at you as you're
Mhm.
taking the photograph. I will tell you that Karen Carter is bitter that she has not had a chance to experience this yet. So
It's
um,
amazing. Yeah.
I think we all should experience a pimento massage, or the Rasta massage. It's quite extra, and this is an extraordinary photograph. Moving on to Not. So I like, again, the fact that you are always toggling between the kind of documentary and the conceptual within the documentary, and the fact that you kind of zero in on this knot and you create this kind of abstract image. What compelled you to kind of capture, what was it about this knot that you kind of focus on so
Yes.
beautifully?
So this is actually a knot on a gate, like it's enclosing an abandoned restaurant
Mm.
that kind of faces the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny to see that no one's kind of tried to occupy the space again, or um, kind of we sometimes here we'll have, a restaurant that closes, and
Mm-hmm.
then they want to and they'll use that same space again and reopen it. But here it's kind of just stayed on its own. And I think about the stories that kind of happened in there, and it's kind of like this opening, like when you look at the photo graphically, you see the textures of the wood, which is
Mm-hmm.
important to me, juxtaposed with the textures of the foliage in the background, and then you have the textures of the knot, and they're kind of all playing
Mm-hmm.
together, but it's kind of like this gateway into what was. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why I kind of thought about how I shot it, and the knot just seems like this is the only thing that's stopping you from going into the space,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a thick knot. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's also holding things together
yeah.
in a way. It's kind of tethered the fence together. So, again, a kind of metaphor for the community, something that is abandoned yet trying to kind of hold together in a way. And I think you've captured it beautifully. And also this kind of building on this idea of abandonment, and neglect, and a resilient community. The Tribra boat that you captured. Can you tell me a little bit about this image?
So this, I can't remember exactly where we were coming from or
Mm,
going to, but we were just driving, and I had asked my uncle at the time if he could stop the car, because I just saw this structure that was kind of leaning off the side of the road, and then this boat. So obviously there were occupants of that structure. There were occupants
mm-hmm,
of this boat, that's why they painted, those words on it. And I'm like, somebody owned it, but it hadn't looked like it had been used in years. And so I just kind of thought, this is that example of absence and presence.
mm-hmm,
The
mm-hmm,
writing is still present to show that there were people who used this boat, but the bodies are gone. The people who use it
mm-hmm,
aren't there. So
mm-hmm,
you can only think of what the story was. I wondered, how many times did that boat go out to sea? How many times did it come in? Did it catch fish? And so that's kind of why I took the shot. I was
mm-hmm,
thinking about all of that. And
mm-hmm,
then you kind of, the
mm-hmm.
telephone pole was leaning off to the side as well. So
You took the words out of my mouth,
yeah,
Christina. I was
yeah,
just going to say, the kind of leaning, telephone post, and the leaning structure, and everything is just kind of out of place and out of kilter,
hmm,
but somehow you bring it all together, right?
hmm.
So yeah. I'm just looking at the time. Okay, I think we're still good. Sam and Friend, Kids in the Stream. Is this in the same area near the
Falls.
Assange? Yes. Okay.
No.
Oh,
It's
near
in
the
the same.
Okay.
It's in the same area of Reggae Falls, actually.
Okay.
So these two boys around Christmas break, because it was around December, I went. And when they found out we were trying to go to the falls, they were like, "Can we come with you?" So they followed us all the way to the falls, and they were acting as like tour guides, if you will. And Sam is the young boy who's looking at us, and he just shared his life with me. He asked me about my camera. He was telling me what he wants to do when he gets older, and his friend was sitting there, and I just thought he had such a wonderful soul, like, you know, and he was telling me all the dreams he has. He's only 10. So and we were just talking about that, and so I took his picture of him throughout the time we were there and he was just sitting by the rocks.
And we talked about last night, and I started off with this question about the series bringing attention to the community. What are some of the challenges, if any, do you see with doing this type of work? Do you see it, how quickly can this turn into, well, as you said, trying to kind of exploit a community? How do you see that as a challenge, and how do you kind of work with that challenge?
Well, I'm always aware that people might view me as an outsider. And wanting to document these photos, especially if they're worried that you're going to do it for profit. But I think what's important is because my father is from that area, I still feel like I'm still part of the community. And I don't act like I'm an outsider. I speak to people, I build connection, and I'm spending time there for a great amount of time. This is not the first time I've gone back to Jamaica. I've been going back to Jamaica for years and years and years. So this is not my first rodeo in documenting, but it's the first time I've actually been able to document his specific community,
right?
Because that's important to me,
right?
And so
you're an insider and an outsider,
yeah. But I don't. Again, I think if I was up in their face and trying to do it like very, let me take your photo, let me pose you, let me do this, can you go over there? It's not like that. And that's why too, if you're waiting for the moments, you'll get a moment like this.
Yeah, I was just going to say this, it's very, you can see it in this photograph that you waited for the moment. He's familiar with you. He's so relaxed. His smile is just, it kind of lights up his face. And there is no kind of stress about taking this photograph. He's not challenging you at all. So yeah, I think that you certainly, this idea of creating relationships with subjects is really, really important. You talked about your dad and his constant connection to this community. And this is a photograph, as you explained to me, of her name is Gloria, and a very, very close friend of your dad's.
So I think what's interesting about West Indian culture and across the Caribbean is this, they still connect back to your roots, back to your community. You can have moved to different places over the world, but you still are able to still connect back to the place that you've left. And what I find unique about my father in particular is his connection to all his childhood friends. And then how they then have children, and then he connects his children with their children. It's this kind of like passing of tradition and passing the torch on to your children. And Auntie Gloria, because you have to say it with respect. Auntie Gloria, this is somebody, my father, her husband, my Uncle Raymond and her husband, my dad has known them since childhood. And so, when he goes back, he makes sure he checks for them. They WhatsApp each other all the time. And it's just interesting to show that how they still all connect, even having left your initial community that brought you together. You're still having community outside of your initial hometown. So, and then it's interesting how this level of wanting to have your children connect the same way. And it's funny because my friendships, a lot of them I had known over years and years and years and years. And I think that's because my father's kind of shown me about, this importance of connecting to people all the time, and keeping people present in your life who are important and mean something.
And you've shown that through the trajectory of your practice, through your dad's journey, that he has been absent, right, outside of Jamaica, outside of the community, but there is still these connections which make him very present and you very present every time you go back and forth.
Right.
So it's you're kind of continuing that tradition through the documentation, using your photography. So as we almost wrap up, I think, so these are the posers. So you explained that this gentleman coined the phrase Rastaman massage.
Or so he says.
Is this documented anywhere?
Yeah, he was adamant. Yeah, man, it's a Rastaman massage. I did make this name, and so yeah, and he was like, take my picture and then come back and show me my picture.
And did you do that?
I still have to go. Once this COVID stuff's over, I'm going to go back and show him his picture.
Right.
But
wonderful.
he was just and the gentleman beside him is supposed to be his young protege.
So he will take on the tradition.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And so is this actually, I think you get a glimpse of him in the other photograph.
Yeah, he was there, but so this is kind of as you're going into Bath Fountain down to the stream. This is kind of, he was sitting there, and this is where he charges people for the Rastaman massage.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is a capitalist enterprise then.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's the best massage you will ever have.
Right. Oh God.
Yeah.
So I just want to take us very quickly to some of the images or photographs on the fence surrounding the band gallery. So here we have your young friend again, Boy and Brooke, kind of the back of him as he's staring in. So this was taken at the same time then as the other one with his friend.
So so when you go to Reggae Falls, it kind of goes into like a river, and the river kind of has I guess pockets of deeper water. They're shallow and then deeper. So he's actually about to jump, and because he saw crayfishes and he wanted to catch the crayfish. And actually my father that same day was catching crayfishes, and they were talking about the fish and comparing them. But yeah, so I just kind of got him before, and he was like, watch me. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, for viewers, you have to see these photographs in person because the print quality and the details that are brought forth in person is not captured on the screen at all. They don't do they do an injustice actually. So we're trying to give you a sense of what these photographs look like, but you really do have to see them in person just to see the incredible quality of these black and white images. High grade. So I'm fascinated by the angle with which you took this photograph, its composition, and we didn't talk about this last night, so I'm intrigued as to who this is, what he's doing, and why you shot it in this way.
Well, the name kind of speaks for itself about what he's doing.
Does, yes, I think it does.
It's what he's doing, but that's part of the lifestyle there. And he had just been, this gentleman had just been like working, and he was cutting the grass and
Mm-hmm.
just cutting the lawns, and he just kind of sat down and wanted to, want a ting.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally like shots that aren't always straightforward, and I just kind of thought, well, what would it look like if I turned the camera kind of this way? I tend to do that a lot. I noticed in a lot of my shots, I kind of tilt the camera and change the angles of the camera to make it a more dynamic shot. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not a huge story, but just, he was sitting there, I was standing there, and kind of where we are, there's like, it's a little makeshift bar. And so I was just standing there and with my camera and talking to the bartender, and I was just having a little drink. It was in the morning, early morning, and he was there, and yeah.
No, it's a great shot. And again, I really do like the idea of the unstraight shot, that you're continually kind of playing with your medium, playing with the camera. And it seems highly appropriate that you would tilt it a little bit given what he's doing and about to do. So
yeah.
Highly appropriate.
Yeah.
Portland man.
I always think it's lovely when, you can have fresh coconut water, and you can, have fresh produce off the trees. And this gentleman was cutting down coconuts, and I shot this from different angles, and we just stopped to get a drink, and he cut down a coconut for us, and it just kind of shows too, like, again, people helping other people. He didn't ask for anything. He was like, "You thirsty?" He gave us one. So.
Painter, again, the community at work. I love that, in between the kind of familial people, are just, people at work, their daily business, whatever they're doing, plying a trade, kind of the continuity of a community like every day. Is that what you always set out to do?
I think so. He was painting the church, and it was also around Christmas time, so he wanted to give it a fresh coat of paint for the church, update it, because I guess they were going to have like Christmas Eve ceremonies and not ceremony, masses, and he was just kind of painting it, and I just thought, life goes on, and I think we always get this view that, people are sitting around, they do nothing. No, there's this community of work, a work ethic. No job is too small. It takes many different people to make community come together.
And the last photograph, quickly becoming one of my favorites as well, is Little Gyal. And you have a story about how you captured it. I personally am really drawn to photographs from the Caribbean of children in their uniforms. There's just something about a child in a uniform in the Caribbean that is so endearing to me. How did you take the photograph? And there's something, I don't know if it's because of the screen, it seems like it's got a snapshot quality. It was taken on the moment, but, taken in black and white. It's almost like a black and white Polaroid.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, where did that come from? Anyway, I might have done that. Can you talk about it a little bit?
So,
as we close off.
So for me, I kind of, on top of photographing Morant Bay, I've also kind of been doing another series where I do photograph school children in their uniform and their daily lives. And I think it's interesting because I think here in North America, how we look at uniform, how we look at education isn't the same as other places. There's a different kind of work ethic. I think the uniform gives a level of respect and shows tradition too. And so this young girl, I guess every day after school, they go and get snacks from this local man who sells cheesies, and she was adamant that I hurry up and take her photo because she wanted to go buy these cheesies.
Mm.
So her direction of her stare is at the man who's selling cheesy, like, hurry up, take my
Right.
photo.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And she just kind of was standing there, and I was there too. And I just happened to be at the end of the day taking photos. And so I've been doing this now for about, well, yeah, since about 2008 till now. I still do it. And so these are one of my favorites from that collection. And while it's not necessarily part of this particular series, it's still part of the Jamaican community and culture.
Caribbean culture on the whole,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
so you can always identify the school by the school uniform.
Exactly.
And, which I absolutely love. Well, Christina, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been fascinating. I will maybe keep the PowerPoint on, shall I? Because we have some special guests. And these are individuals who have personal kind of family ties to Morant Bay, the St. Thomas Parish. And so I'd like to begin with Vanley Burke, all the way from Birmingham. And if you don't know who Vanley Burke is, let me just describe him as the godfather of Black British photography. That should tell you all there is to know about Vanley. So we are so honored to have him in our presence to talk about his own experience coming from or adjacent to this area, but you'll let us know, Vanley, and what that was like. And the fact that you two are photographers, so.
Yes, thanks for having me, and what wonderful set of photographs. Thanks, Christina. I mean, I was absolutely flabbergasted when I saw St. Thomas came up, and to think that someone from Canada is interested in St. Thomas. It's a long neglected parish, but I think St. Thomas is still suffering for its deeds with regard to liberating Jamaica. You know, when thousands of people died, you know, at the hands of a very barbaric and cruel governor, you know, which occupied the country at the time, 1685, you know. So I was, I'm from further up the hills. You know, we pass Seaforth, Morant Bay, and go up the hills. I'm from, you know, when you can't go no more. When you can't drive no more, and you get on a donkey, and the donkey can't go no more. I live around the corner. In fact, that is quite true. In fact, because I've not in my return to Jamaica, I've not been able to get back to where I was born because we all left there. You know, there's no direct path to it. So I mean, I was absolutely fascinated, and I think it's a long neglected part of the country, and I think the fact that it's been neglected. It makes it even the richer culturally. I would describe it like it's like a river, but if you like, one of the streams, and towards the end of the stream of the river, where not a lot of traffic, so you don't get a lot of changes, you know, in the river. Instead, oh, you met me understand yourself now. The picture look better than me.
Okay.
So what happens there is there isn't much changes, and I was absolutely, you know, I myself I'm doing something here in England, and I was asked to write something about, you know, this project I'm working on, and I felt the need to start back with where I came from, which is where I always start, which is when I heard the Morant Bay Rebellion. So, you know, that you know, this for me just blew my mind, really. I just briefly got my first camera when I was about 10 years old. I suppose a bit like the lad sitting on the fence, Sam, on the stone, Sam and his friend. And in fact, I think that's one of my favorite photographs. I love the tones in that very much. I love the quality and the feel of that. I love the confidence in the young lad's face, and I like the richness in the background that you've presented there. and my interest was really, you know, in the absence of these people that you're trying to capture, you know, you're taking, if you like, you're returning in the shadow of your father. And it's good that you have him there, if you like, to guide you, and if you, you know, you've been able to pick up the mantle and, you know, run with it on your own. So by the time he isn't able to go with you anymore, you would have established your own roots, with your own relationship with you and the space. I like that very much. I think I wondered why you made no mention of the Morant Bay Rebellion, which for me, as you've heard, you know, looms so large. You know, in the scheme of things with regards to St. Thomas, it is, you know, it is one of the most important. The uprising, I should say, was one of the most important acts in the liberation of the people of Jamaica from slavery. But I think I've always said, or should I say, I've always thought that perhaps they have been left behind simply because of their deeds. You know, they seem to have suffered for it. And I just wondered if that would feature in some way in your future work. If I might just say briefly before I finish, am I talking too much? Mike, can I go on a little bit longer? Well, don't I? Anyway, so I've been taking a few photographs I've returned a few times, and I've taken a few photographs on various journeys of mine, and it's more or less in the track of, if you like, documenting semblance of my youth, you know, where I grew up, the place I grew up, some of the people I meet, and that sort of thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Vanley. That was wonderful. Such a, I can't wait to see what you do if you do go back to Morant Bay or to St. Thomas, and how you capture the area as it's continually changing. Courtney, would you like to jump in? We can't hear you.
Unmuting.
Oh.
Hello. I mean, I was excited about this show before I knew anything about it. Before I knew who the photographer was, just by the fact of Morant Bay. And I don't know if I connected with Karen or asked somebody, I'm like, do they mean Morant Bay St. Thomas? I had a hard time imagining that, you know, that there'd be a show that would focus and feature in Morant Bay. And Morant Bay is significant to me because I spent the first 7 years of my life in the town of Morant Bay. And so it was funny, I looked at the picture of the man painting the wall. If I'm correct, it's on Queen Street, and that's the Methodist Church. And we grew up in the yard next to the Methodist Church, where many decades ago, my great aunt was the headmistress of the school, the little primary school that was held in the Methodist Church on Queen Street in St. Thomas in Morant Bay.
Wow.
And the Morant Bay Rebellion is sort of interesting. One of my childhood memories was the square in front of the
courthouse.
The courthouse in Morant Bay, where there was I used to think it was frightening. It was a statue sculpted by Edna Manley of Paul Bogo holding like a sword. And, you know, and they used to have like parades, and whenever there's anything, big community festivals or anything would happen on the square there by the Anglican Church. And I just remember being frightened of that statue. And years ago, going back with my brother and jumping up on the podium and posing next to this thing that used to, in my head, was so huge and imposing and scary when, you know, as an adult was very small. So there are lots of images that bring back memories of my childhood in Jamaica. And I've been back as an adult since. My uncle lives just outside Morant Bay in Retreat, just past License in Retreat, and is still there. And so I love the image of the Rasta, of the river, and by Bath Fountain. Bath Fountain is actually, there's a hotel and a spa there. And so there's that river piece, but my memory of that Rasta rub down was, you know, the last time we were there was 2006 for my uncle and my aunt's wedding anniversary. So our whole family had come down. So that morning, my uncle had brought my brothers and myself to, you know, to get that experience. And as we were approaching, you know, they saw us as, you know, North Americans. They probably thought Americans are coming, whatever, whatever. And, you know, so they start to give us a little hustle and the price. And my brother asked a price, and somebody that mentioned what the price was. And my uncle was enraged. He's like, "We are Jamaicans. These are my nephews." So he was like, "No, they're not going to get the tourist price. You need to give them the local price." And so we went, and that was the first time I remember having smelled or experienced pimento oil. That was the piece you talk about, that piece. But then also the rub down was a little rough to me, and a little kind of perfunctory. I remember, I mean, it was a beautiful setting. I remember taking photographs myself of it because there's a bamboo sort of forest. It's really lovely, lush once you actually get into it. And another memory was, you know, you talk about the modified bleach jugs or laundry detergent jugs that they poked holes in to make kind of like a shower head, a mobile shower head that they could drop on you. So my uncle, there are pictures of my uncle in his underwear, my brother Nigel and I in our bathing suits, and my other brother Adrian, who refused to get any rub down from any man. So he was the one holding our bags and all our goods, and he was watching and eyeing the folks suspiciously. But you know, I was sort of thinking about you talked about the restaurant by the beach, and I was wondering if that was the beach where we would go as children, you know, in the early evening. After we had Sunday dinner, we'd go down Jackass Lane down to the beach and sort of hang out there. So there's much that's, as you said, sort of neglected and falling apart, but there's still very much life there. There's still very much communities there. There's still very much resilience that goes back to the rebellion and the spirit of the rebellion in that part of the world. And so I'm really happy to see these photographs and to have this opportunity to talk about that place that I love and hold very much in my heart.
Can I address Courtney and Vanley really briefly?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, you know, the Paul Bogo statue, and at the courthouse, it's not there anymore because they felt like it wasn't in the likeness of him, so they took it down, and they haven't resurrected a new statue. And you know, and you do bring up a point, you know, Morant Bay and Jamaica is full of historical people, you know, from Marcus Garvey to you know, Three Finger Jack, and then and Paul Bogo, and but those two kind of benchmark, you know, Morant Bay. And the reason why I don't think I so much focused on it for this body of work is because I do still plan on continuing with it, and so I might not have been able to kind of really capture the courthouse and capture that part of the square. I'm still very much aware of it when I do the photos. It's not something that I wanted to totally eliminate. I'm still working, you know?
Yeah, but I think it's important to say that this is your narrative.
Yeah.
Right? This is your story. These are your images based on your relationships and connections to that place that may be different than those of us who are there. So my photographs may look different if I were to take them of the places that I connected with based on my history there. But I think there's no, you know, it's not about needing to take that image if that's not an image that really connects with you or resonates with you just because it's historic. I think there is value in the narratives that you're sharing and your perspectives and your connection to that history.
Thank you.
Mark, can we get you to jump in with your familial experiences with the area?
Definitely. Thank you very much for inviting me to this beautiful exhibition and this like great discussion that we're having. So the title, Absence, Presence, and then when I saw on Karen's Instagram page something related to Morant Bay, I was very, very excited because that is where my mom and her 3 siblings came from. And they came to Canada in the 1950s, late 50s, and like the early 60s. But they didn't look back, so they didn't return. So it was a place that was always kind of absent to me. So unlike Christina, who had like lots and lots of stories, I had very minimal stories. And this is something that I've compared a lot with my cousins, who've talked about how their father, my uncle, never talks at all about Jamaica. or like two other aunts, they don't talk at all about Jamaica. But like when I press my mom, I find out certain things. So like my family name is one of them is Blake. So I find that there's like a McDonald, a Cooper, a Copeland, and even my mom was telling me that there was like a shoemaker. So I was actually wondering in Christina's photo if that like shoemaker comes from a line of shoemakers that possibly could have a connection to my family. So that's where the sense of a presence comes for me from just taking a look at the photos, which is like really, really exciting for me. So my journeys to Morant Bay were like in 1971, 77, 1978, and then not till 2017. So 2017 was kind of like a deliberate trip for me to return to Morant Bay to kind of find a sense of presence there. So I went on this trip alone, and it was interesting because my mom, who when I was growing up as a kid in Rexdale, you know, and I'm also like Christina, I'm mixed. My dad is white. I would try to speak patois, but my mom would tell me, don't speak patois, that's broken English. And so things where I would try to find links and connections to my sense of Jamaicanness were kind of like denied. So when I said I was going to make this trip in 2017, my mother would say, I don't know why you want to go back there. If you value your life, you will cancel this trip. So that was like huge for me, but I decided to go, and I'm still alive. So I made this trip, and the inn where I stayed in Morant Bay, I was telling the owner there that my family's from Browns, like my grandfather lived in Browns Gully. And someone told me, oh, that Browns Gully, that's just up the hill. So like prior to this trip, I was like emailing every single Blake on Facebook to try to see if they were related to me, but I never found a connection. So when I went back and I went to Browns Gully, I had a memory. It had been 39 years since I had been there. But looking at seeing a lot of the photos, so much of Morant Bay looks the same to me as it did back in like 1978. Like visiting the library, like walking by the library, going into the market, it was almost, you know, as if some things had not changed. I tried to find the Paul Bogo statue, not realizing that it had been removed, because I remember that was a big impact. It was kind of intense too, Courtney. I hear what you're saying. But while I went up Browns Gully, I actually found, it's like my step grandmother, well, my grandmother, and I hadn't seen her since 1978, in a house that is being a work in progress, being built. But it was like a trip of finding presence. And in this exhibition, and like hearing, you know, I've talked with Courtney before, Christina and I, we just met, but it's like, oh wow, like Morant Bay feels like more of a presence for me now rather than an absence. So like, yeah. So there's other things, but one of the main things was that I still have very distinct smells from being a 9-year-old, like the smells of Morant Bay, the smells of the bush, very, very inside of me. So while a part of my family, a big part of my family is disconnected from Jamaica, I still feel it inside of me. So I really appreciate you inviting me to share this and taking the beautiful photographs.
No, thank you, Mark. That's a wonderful kind of testimony to your memories and childhood and what is evoked in Christina's photographs.
May I say one last thing?
Of course.
One thing that I did every single day when I was there was I just went for walks, just to take in, again, as I was saying, the sights, the smells, visiting the local high school, just, you know, and everyone was open and so welcoming, and it felt like home. So that I'm looking forward to going back.
Absolutely. We have one more, I think, a surprise guest so who wants to speak. Donette, hello. How are you?
Good. Hi, everybody. Christina, thank you. And here are a couple of reasons. First of all, the photographs are just fantastic. I it's a lot of nostalgia for me because I'm a Kingstonian, grew up under the halfway tree clock, and my parents are, originally from the country. But we used to go to St. Thomas, I remember very clearly, and there was a falls that we used to go to the beach, and we would take a picnic basket back in the day when, we all had very little. And it was really sweet being there. My husband also, his mom, my late husband's mother, was from St. Thomas. And but what you need to know about St. Thomas, and Julie, there are such resilient and amazing people who have come out of St. Thomas in spite of all of the setbacks. And Julie knows two of them, Wes Hall, who is a pride, the pride of our community, and Wayne Purbu are both from St. Thomas. And they're very successful business leaders in Canada. But I would like, and I know that Christina said to Courtnay, and Courtnay said, no, you take photos or you take memories according to your own perspective and your own memories. But I just wanted to mention, because I too am biracial, probably like all of us here. So my dominant is Asian, Chinese. My grandfathers were from China and my grandmothers were Jamaican. Mix up, And I would love to see from any of the photographers here, the Chinese shop. I don't know if you remember when, in every district, every village in Jamaica, and Malcolm Gladwell actually, when he did Outliers, the Jamaica was given its own chapter. I mean, that's how large we are, that Malcolm, who himself is half Jamaican, would dedicate a whole chapter to Jamaica. And the Chinese shop was such an integral part, and it was such a meeting place in all of the districts in Jamaica. And the Chinese integrated, I think we're one of the first outsiders who integrated so well with the Jamaicans of African descent. Thank you so much, and thanks to Karen and Julie.
Thank you, Donette. Thank you so much. Well, I'll just say that it's always a pleasure to work with Christina. Irie is one of my favorites. Christina, I'm just going to put it out there, but Morant Bay is now getting really close to that, because it is an extraordinary body of work, and continue to do what you do, and remind everyone that the work is for sale. So if you want to buy one of the works, please be in touch with the gallery, and they can facilitate a sale.
Say thank you. Thank you so much, Christina, Julie, for a brilliant talk. I learned a ton. Thank you to the folks at Contact for letting us experiment. I think a lot of organizations are learning things around engagement virtually how else could we have Vanley Burke at one of our talks or at an opening? So there are benefits to doing things this way virtually.